welcome to today's deep dive. We are actually skipping the usual pleasantries today because I want to ask you a question right out of the gate.
Right into it. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, think about your life right now. Just the reality of your day-to-day existence. What if who you are isn't defined by your grand intentions?
Right.
What if it's not defined by, your lucky breaks or those dramatic, cinematic moments you always assumed would shape your destiny? What if instead you are entirely defined by the quiet, the daily decisions you make when absolutely no one is watching?
Wow. I mean, it is a disarmingly simple premise, but it becomes incredibly heavy when you really sit with it.
It really does.
We are the choices we make, not the choices we intend to make, not the ones we post about on social media.
Right, the performative ones.
Exactly. But the ones we actually execute in the quiet moments of our, Tuesday afternoons.
And that is the central premise of the incredibly rich stack of material we are exploring today. We've got this fascinating synthesized document titled, "We Are the Choices We Make." And it pulls together perspectives from all over the place. Philosophy, physical therapy, stand-up comedy, history, all to look at what it actually means to live deliberately.
And the mission for today's deep dive is really about cutting through the overwhelming noise of modern advice to help you build a more intentional life.
Yeah.
We are going to decode how small improvements, practical wisdom, and even your physical harmony all stack up to create profound, lasting changes. It is really about understanding the mechanics of those quiet moments we usually ignore.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because while the idea that you are entirely responsible for your life might feel a little uncomfortable.
Over the front.
Yeah, maybe even intimidating at first. It is also incredibly liberating. It refuses the fiction that you're just a passenger in your own life. As C.S. Lewis famously pointed out, it is never too late to choose a new goal or a new dream. It truly does not matter what your age is, and it doesn't matter what your current circumstances are. The slate can be wiped clean.
Which is such an empowering starting point. I mean, if every single day is a fresh opportunity to choose differently, then we have to look closely at how we are generating our choices and our ideas in the first place, especially when it comes to our work.
Right, which brings us to our first major concept today, the power of 1% and how we approach innovation.
Yes.
There's this brilliant analogy from Peter Drucker from his work, The Frontiers of Management. He says that innovative ideas are essentially like frog's eggs. Out of 1,000 hatched in a pond, only 1 or 2 actually survive to maturity.
What's fascinating here is how Drucker uses that staggering ratio to define what he calls the innovative executive. When you think about 1,000 to 1 survival rate for ideas, the natural human instinct is to become intensely critical.
Oh, for sure.
You want to immediately dismiss any idea that isn't perfectly formed right out of the gate. But Drucker says the truly innovative person doesn't dismiss a half-baked embryonic idea with contempt.
Right.
Instead, they look at this foolish-seeming notion and ask a very specific question. They ask, what would be needed to make this feasible? What would actually make it real?
But wait, isn't it more efficient to kill bad ideas quickly? Most of our half-baked ideas are genuinely terrible. Why spend time coddling them?
Because the process of asking what if is what builds your innovative muscle. If you demand perfection on day one, you kill the 1 or 2 frog's eggs that actually had the potential to change your business or your life.
Yeah, that gets.
Asking what is needed to make an idea real forces you out of a critical mindset and into a creative one.
That is a massive reframe.
Yeah.
It's the difference between playing defense and playing offense with your mind.
Exactly.
And there are no shortcuts to converting a small idea into a successful reality. It is just as risky and difficult as trying to launch a massive disruptive innovation. There is only the work.
Right.
But that brings us to a slightly uncomfortable question from our sources, directed right at you, the listener. Are you inventing things to do to avoid the important work?
Oof. That is a question that lands like a stone in your shoe, isn't it?
It really is.
We are all so incredibly creative when it comes to productive-seeming busyness.
Oh, we are masters of it. The constant checking of emails,
Yes.
the endless meetings to plan other meetings,
Yeah.
reorganizing the files on your desktop. We use that frictionless busyness to avoid sitting down with the heavy, half-baked idea that actually matters.
We do.
So how do we get out of that trap? The advice here is brilliantly counterintuitive. Set the bar low to start, except that today will not be perfect, and nobody's going to get out of your way to let you work.
Which brings us to the Japanese concept of Kaizen, popularized in the West by Masaka Imai. Kaizen is the practical philosophy of focusing on 1% daily marginal gains. You do not wait for the perfect conditions.
Because they never come.
Exactly. You don't wait for a dramatic, heroic reinvention of your entire work ethic. You just aim to be 1% better or push an idea 1% further each day. If you wait for perfect motivation and absolute clarity before you begin, you will be waiting forever.
So true. But we've just spent all this time talking about mental frameworks, cultivating ideas, avoiding busy work, improving by 1%. But there's a glaring blind spot here.
The physical side.
Yes, you can have the sharpest, most innovative mind in the world, but if the physical vessel carrying that mind is exhausted or neglected, none of it matters. We have to tend to the body.
It is a crucial connection that so many high achievers completely miss. You cannot separate the mind's capacity to make good choices from the body's capacity to sustain the energy required for those choices.
And to hit this point home, we look at Leo Tolstoy's A Calendar of Wisdom.
Yes.
Oh, wait, Tolstoy, the guy who wrote War and Peace.
The very same.
He has this surprisingly intense, ferocious take on gluttony. He argues that overindulgence isn't just a private, harmless habit.
No, he argues it is the root of a much deeper failure. I mean, modern society tells us to treat ourselves, right? That a huge, indulgent meal is just a reward for hard work.
Sure, we hear that all the time.
But Tolstoy says that overeating actively weakens the will. A person who overeats cannot fight laziness. The body is simply using too much energy to process the excess.
Right, that food coma feeling.
Exactly. And a lazy person cannot resist the pull of further dissipation. It creates a biological domino effect that destroys your discipline.
To really illustrate this, there's a story Tolstoy borrows from Socrates. It's the ancient myth of Odysseus and the sorceress Circe.
I love this example.
Right, so Circe famously invited travelers to a feast and then turned them into pigs. But Odysseus, the wisest of the Greeks, did not transform. And it wasn't because of some magic spell. It was because he did not eat to excess. His crew, on the other hand, rushed the abundance of sweet food, stuffed themselves blindly, and were immediately transformed into swine.
The psychological insight there is incredibly sharp. Socratic philosophy uses this myth to point out that if you cannot govern your most basic appetite at the dinner table, you will struggle to govern yourself in the boardroom, in your relationships, or in your finances.
Yeah.
The mouth is the first gateway of discipline. The practical recommendation derived from this is beautifully simple. Behave in such a way that when you finish your dinner, you still want just a little more. You retain your control.
I love how we can take that ancient mythological philosophy and put it right next to the modern economy of words from Michael Pollan's book, In Defense of Food.
Oh, perfect connection.
We overcomplicate nutrition so much with macronutrient tracking and complex diets, but Pollan arrives at the exact same conclusion as the ancients with a two-sentence rule. If it came from a plant, eat it. If it was made in a plant, don't.
Just two sentences that offer a lifetime's worth of navigational guidance. But tending the physical vessel goes far beyond just what we consume. It is also about how we inhabit our bodies.
Right.
There is this brilliant observation from a physiotherapist named Vladimir Janda. He noted that the ultimate representation of harmony within the body is symmetrical, unrestricted movement patterns.
So what does that actually look like in everyday life?
Think about how you sit at your desk. Do you always cross your right leg over your left? Do you hike your left shoulder up when you are stressed?
I definitely do the shoulder thing.
Most of us do something like that. Do you carry your heavy bag on the exact same side every single day? Janda suggests that these tiny asymmetrical compensations are physical manifestations of a distracted, unbalanced life.
Wow.
Symmetrical, unrestricted movement represents a well-tended, observant life. A body that moves freely without bracing or compensating is the body of a person who has been paying deep attention to their choices. So if unrestricted movement is the goal, how do we actually get our bodies to relax into that state? We hold so much tension by default.
It requires immense patience, which is why the inclusion of the Wim Hof breathing practice here makes perfect sense.
Oh, yeah.
The practice itself is simple. Taking 30 deep, relaxed breaths to fully saturate the body with oxygen, followed by a long, sustained breath hold. But the most critical instruction Hof gives is that the breath must never be forced.
Right, because if you force a breath hold, your body panics.
Exactly.
Your heart rate spikes, you tense up, and you actually take steps backward. And that isn't just a physiological rule for your lungs. It is a profound metaphor for life.
It really is.
You cannot force growth. You cannot force an innovative idea to mature faster than it's ready to. And you cannot force your body to heal on a schedule. You can only create the conditions for growth, show up consistently, and trust the process. You have to go at your own pace. This raises an important question, though. We have talked about generating ideas, and we have talked about governing the physical body. But what happens when you have great intentions and you have a healthy body, but you completely lack the practical wisdom to execute your choices effectively in the real world?
That is exactly the pivot we need to make. Practical wisdom over unexamined intentions. There is this quietly devastating parable from the philosopher Anthony de Mello from his book 1 Minute Wisdom.
Yes, the wedding story.
Yeah, there is a disciple who is very proud of her egalitarian spirit, her deep sense of fairness. So at her wedding banquet, she decides to completely invert social convention out of love. She seats all the poor guests at the head of the banquet table, and she seats all the wealthy aristocratic guests by the door. She steps back, thinking she has done this beautiful, noble thing, and she waits for her master's approval.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see exactly why the master shook his head in disappointment. Because she didn't use practical wisdom, the result was a complete disaster.
Total miss.
Her family was humiliated by the breach of etiquette. Her wealthy guests felt deeply insulted and alienated, and perhaps worst of all, her poor guests were far too self-conscious and terrified of using the wrong utensils at the head table to actually eat their fill. Absolutely nobody won.
Think about how often we do this in our own lives. We implement a new policy at work, or we enforce a strict rule in our households purely because it makes us feel like a good, righteous person.
Right.
But we never stop to consider the logistical nightmare we are creating for the people we claim to be helping. The road to harm is paved with good intentions poorly examined. Practical wisdom means looking past your own ego to see the actual consequences of your choices.
Which brings us to what might be the ultimate real-world example of practical wisdom from our sources. It is an anecdote from Ryan Holiday's The Daily Dad.
I love this one.
Let's set the scene. It is 1952. Queen Elizabeth II has just ascended to the throne of the British Empire. She inherited her father's long-standing tradition of having weekly private audiences with the Prime Minister, who at the time was the towering, intimidating figure of Winston Churchill.
Not exactly a guy you mess around with.
Not at all. Historically, for years, these critical meetings of state were held at 5:30 in the evening.
But she moved them.
Yeah.
A 26-year-old newly crowned queen looked at Winston Churchill and moved the meetings to 6:30 p.m.
Yeah.
And she didn't do it as a power play. She didn't do it because she wanted to sleep in. She moved them because 5:30 p.m. was bath time for her young children. She was simply not willing to sacrifice that hour with her kids. Family came first, before the Prime Minister, before the business of the empire.
It is such a powerful example of clarity. She knew what actually mattered, and she made a deliberate choice at a very real political cost every single Tuesday evening.
So what does this all mean for you? Why are we talking about the British monarchy? Because it strips away every single excuse we make about being too busy or too important to prioritize the right things.
Absolutely.
If the Queen of England can make the deliberate choice to push off the man who led Britain through World War II so she can wrangle a toddler in a bathtub, you can absolutely reschedule your 5:00 p.m. conference call with your mid-level manager to go to your daughter's soccer game. It is a choice. You just have to be willing to make it.
That requires an incredible amount of honesty with yourself. And speaking of honesty, the final section we are looking at today deals with stripping away the performance of our lives.
Yeah.
Mark Twain Riley called honesty the best of the lost arts. It implies that true authenticity is something foundational that we have just allowed to atrophy through disuse.
We layer Twain's thought with a haunting observation from Elizabeth Bibesco's book, Haven. She pointed out that to others, we are almost never ourselves. We are merely a performer in their lives.
That's so true.
We act differently around our boss than we do our spouse, and differently with our spouse than we do the barista. We are cast in these parts we don't even fully realize we are playing.
So how do we find the antidote to that constant shape-shifting? How do we drop the act and return to ourselves?
That's the big question.
The recommendation here points toward very specific, quiet practices. The first is the caminata afuera, the walk outside. but specifically at the golden hour, dusk, when the light falls at its most forgiving angle and the urgency of the day's emails begins to fade. You just walk and ask nature, what do you have to teach me?
And that ties perfectly into the Japanese concept of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, which has been extensively researched by Dr. King Lee. We aren't talking about a high-intensity trail run with headphones blasting a podcast.
No, it is a deeply sensory experience. You are noticing the smell of the damp earth, the texture of the bark, the specific quality of the fading light. The clinical research backs up the physical benefits, like lowering cortisol and reducing blood pressure, but the intuition is much older than the science. There is something profoundly resetting about walking among trees at dusk with absolutely no destination in mind. It naturally, effortlessly strips away the performance we put on for society. The trees do not care what your job title is. They leave you with something much more honest.
It is entirely about finding humility and simplicity. And we get two really punchy, contrasting perspectives on this to drive it home. First, you have the stand-up comedian Dusty Slay.
Yes.
He offers this piece of profound wisdom completely disguised as a joke. He says, it is better to be happy without a lot of things than to be unhappy trying to get a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's so simple. It almost sounds ridiculous, but try to find the flaw in that logic. You can't.
You really can't. It holds up entirely against the weight of classic philosophy. And second, there is a sharp reminder from the author Brian Tracy that it doesn't matter where you came from, it only matters where you're going. Your past does not dictate your next choice.
Which perfectly sets up the final framework we want to discuss. It comes from the legendary sports coach John Wooden. He constantly advised people to call themselves a teacher rather than a winner or a champion. But why specifically a teacher? Why not celebrate being a winner?
Because adopting the identity of a teacher completely shifts your posture toward the world. If you call yourself a winner, the event is over. You won. The trophy is on the shelf gathering dust.
Right.
It implies a static state of superiority. But if you call yourself a teacher, it implies deep humility. It forces the realization that the work of learning is never truly finished. There is always a new concept to grasp, a skill to refine, and always someone else coming up behind you to help along the path. A teacher is actively engaged in the process of everyday life.
It changes the entire framework of how you view your daily choices. Which brings us to the summary of this incredible deep dive. Making good choices, the ones that actually assemble the person you will eventually become, isn't about those dramatic, glamorous moments. It isn't the stuff that looks great on a resume or gets 100 likes online.
No, it is entirely about the private choices.
The deeply unglamorous ones. It is the decision to eat what comes from a plant instead of something manufactured in a facility. It is the decision to lace up your shoes and take a golden hour walk with no destination instead of sinking into the couch to scroll on your phone.
Yeah.
It is the decision to breathe deeply and not force the process when you feel panicked. It is the decision to ask yourself what it takes to make a half-baked embryonic idea real instead of inventing a dozen trivial tasks to avoid doing the deep work. And yes, it is the practical wisdom to move the Prime Minister's meeting back an hour so you can tuck your kids into bed.
It all culminates in an invitation to a higher purpose. We are asked to remain giving, forgiving, compassionate, and loving. To maintain that posture of a humble teacher, even if cash and prizes happen to pour in, it asks you to use your time, your talent, and your treasure to serve a purpose larger than yourself.
Siempre y por siempre, always and forever.
We are the choices we make, all of them. The small, quiet ones especially. That is the true philosophy of deliberate living. But before we officially wrap up today, this raises an important question I want to leave you with, something to ponder long after this audio stops.
Okay.
We've spent this entire deep dive exploring the active, deliberate choices you make every day. But consider the choices you don't make, the default settings you have simply inherited from your environment, your comfortable routines, or your unexamined past. If you are the choices you make, are you also defined by the choices you actively avoid making?
Wow. That is definitely something to chew on during your next golden hour walk in the trees. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep asking the right questions, keep pushing for those 1% improvements, and we will catch you next time.